We're going to look at some vocabulary when we refer to functions and the variables x and y. So whenever we refer to x and y when we're dealing with functions, it's really referring to the x coordinate and the y coordinate, because if we're given a table of values, some set of data, we often like to graph it on a coordinate plane so we get a really good idea, a picture of what's happening with that set of data. And so therefore, the x is often referring to the x coordinate and the y coordinates of a coordinate plane. So what we want to remember is that the x coordinate is always listed first in an ordered pair. So when I see -2, 0, then -2 is referring to the x, whereas the y coordinate is always listed second. So the 0 is referring to the y. What we want to remember is that x is always going left and right. It's referring to those directions. And so sometimes when I see the letter x, I think of x meaning no, it's not right. So then left and right is the direction that my head is going when I say no, when I shake my head no. Whereas Y can often mean yes. And then if I nod my head up and down, then that can be the up and down directions. So Y is always referring to the up and down directions, and X is always referring to the left and right directions. And that reminds me that the horizontal axis is X and the vertical axis is Y. Sometimes when you're in science class, you might have heard the x and y variables referred to as independent variable and dependent variable. The reason why we use these words is because the y value is often dependent on what the x value happens to be. And so x is the independent variable and y is referred to as the dependent variable. When we're dealing with functions, we use function notation, and we like to say the function of x, or we shorten it and say f of x. Now, if you see f of x is equal to -2x plus 1, something like that, then you can often replace f of x with y, and that might help you see what is actually happening if you are graphing it. Um, and when you get into higher math, you're going to see why we would prefer to use f of x as our notation instead of just using the variable y. But right now, just remember that f of x is another way of saying y. And then, of course, x is just representing itself. Also dealing with functions, we like to say that x is the input values and y is the output values, meaning whatever input I have for x, I have to multiply it by -2 here and add 1, and that's going to give me my output. And then the last set of vocabulary terms we have are domain and range. Whenever we say domain, we're referring to all of the x values. And whenever we say range, we're referring to all of the y values. And those two words, I have no idea why we use those two words to refer to x and y coordinates, but those are what we use. So it's sometimes difficult to remember, well, which vocabulary term am I using to refer to X and which one am I using to refer to Y? So I use this thought. I say to myself, X can be considered the king. If X is king, it has a domain. So domain is referring to X, and then the other word is referring to Y, the range. And then X gets to give the input, whereas Y has to do the work. Y has the output. X is, of course, is referring to itself. And then the independent variable, because the king is independent, whereas Y is dependent on X. Um, and then, of course, X is first because X is king and Y is second. So those are some of the things that I use to help me remember what is X and what is Y.